Dzień dobry, everyone. I am Julian Huguet, and this is All In. You know, something has been gnawing at me for some time now. When people ask me what game I'm most looking forward to in 2020, I keep coming back to one game, and I'm not sure why. That game is Cyberpunk 2077. I think it's fair to say it's one of the most hyped games of the year, but when I try and put down on paper all the reasons why, it doesn't seem to add up. Scoff at me if you want, I have a hard time seeing how a game based on a pen and paper tabletop RPG from 1988 is the game we're all dying to get our hands on. Yes, the neon-tastic VHS future setting looks cool as all get out, but it's also a radical departure from anything the studio has made before. The same can be said for the first-person combat style. I have little to no idea what the story is about, and of course, I accounted for the Keanu factor. I love Keanu Reeves. You love Keanu Reeves. We all love Keanu Reeves. It's the law. But even the Reeves renaissance doesn't explain just how much momentum the cyberpunk hype train has picked up. My only conclusion is there's something more at work here. Some magic force that has given us sky-high expectations for this game. I think more than anything, Cyberpunk 2077 is already pegged as a Game of the Year candidate almost entirely based on the reputation of its developer, CD Projekt Red. How did this Polish developer rise to such lofty heights? What is it about their approach that makes their games so special? To understand, we have to go back to the ashes of the collapsed Soviet Union. In those days, the Polish PC gaming community was small but passionate. One of its members, Marcin Iwiński, had been importing games on cassette tapes, copying them and selling them at local pop-up computer markets since he was barely a teenager in the late 80s. Sure, it was a way to make a little cash, but the real appeal for Iwiński was getting to play the newest games before anyone else. By the early 90s, he and his classmate-turned-business partner, Michał Kaczynski, were selling cracked copies of games on CD-ROMs. Copying games wasn't strictly illegal in those days since there were no copyright laws to speak of in Poland, but when that changed in 1994, Iwiński and Kaczynski went legit and formally founded CD Projekt, or CD Projekt to Westerners like me. But there was a problem. While the games CD Projekt sold were packaged with boxes and manuals written in Polish, the games themselves were still in English. Because the country had just emerged from Soviet control, very few people spoke English, and developers and publishers just didn't think localizing for the tiny Polish market was worth the expense. So CD Projekt took a risk and fully localized a whole game on their own. Ace Ventura, the CD-ROM game. Not making that up. Sales jumped from a few hundred copies to a few thousand, proving that yes, there was an appetite in Poland for video games. But piracy was still rampant. CD Projekt could put all the work into localizing a game only to have ripped copies show up in a flea market 48 hours after release. Rather than take them to court or implement some sort of digital rights management system, CD Projekt decided the best way to beat the pirates was to do something they couldn't. When the company won the rights to publish the now landmark RPG Baldur's Gate in Poland, they brought in famous Polish actors to do the voiceover work, sold the 5 CD-ROM set in a beautiful box, complete with a map of the game world sealed with wax, and, just for good measure, threw in a copy of a D&D manual to boot. They were on the hook for 3,000 copies, a figure they had never hit before, and the company would go bankrupt if they fell short. On launch day, they sold 18,000, and wholesalers were so eager to buy copies, a fistfight broke out in front of their warehouse. I think that's what you'd call a success. CD Projekt only became more ambitious from there, and when the developer of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance went bust, the company was left with a PC port of the game they had been building themselves, and a PS2 dev kit they had smuggled out of London. Well, why not make our own game, they asked. But not just any game, no. In typical CD Projekt fashion, they shot for the moon and approached the writer Andrzej Sapkowski. His Wiedźmin series of fantasy novels that mix Slavic folklore, politics, and a medieval setting are beloved in Poland, a country they reflect in many ways. CD Projekt offered Sapkowski a percentage of the game's profits, but the author didn't believe the game would even make a profit, and so he sold the rights for a lump sum of about $9,500 in today's money. A decision he would come to regret. With the rights in hand, CD Projekt set to work. After a year, the first demo was ready, and it was rejected by every single publisher who saw it. So CD Projekt scrapped it, moved their developers in-house, established a new division, CD Projekt Red, and started over using BioWare's Aurora engine. The team grew from 15 people to 100, though almost none of them had a background in game development. There just wasn't a Polish game dev scene to speak of. They were doctors or bankers, but they all had a passion for games. Eventually, Atari signed on to publish, and in 2007, after 5 years of work, CD Projekt Red released their game, The Witcher. Its atmosphere and well-told story with morally ambiguous choices made it a standout RPG that year. Granted, it was a little rough around the edges, especially the English translation, but for a first outing, it was an incredible achievement. And yet, CD Projekt Red wasn't satisfied. They made an enhanced edition that improved the English and addressed other complaints, and then they just gave it away to anyone who owned a copy of the original game. For free. Why? One developer put it bluntly. They wanted to be known as a studio that makes perfect games. 13 years after their first game was released, and that attitude is still evident in everything they do. The 2008 financial crisis and a disastrous outsourcing of a Witcher console port almost bankrupt the company. But Iwinski refused to sell a majority stake and give up creative control. He steered the company through troubled waters while they developed The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings, a game that built on the success of the first and used their own Red engine that could work on consoles. The game's release in 2011 established CD Projekt Red as a top game studio. 4 years later, The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt took home a bevy of Game of the Year awards and pushed CD Projekt Red even farther into rarefied air. And yet, the company stayed true to its roots, never using DRM and releasing 16 DLC add-ons for The Witcher 3 for free. Marcin Iwinski is still there, and he sees his role as protecting the company from giving into greed and evil forces. Today, the studio that once relied on doctors and bankers attracts developers from around the world. Ironically, the company that got its start translating games from English to Polish has adopted English as its official language so everyone working there can communicate. Its team has grown to over 800 people, all with the same goal those original 15 had of making perfect games. These people put the polish in Polish. I'm sorry, I had to. That is why Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the most anticipated games in recent memory. Though its release has been pushed back twice, they have built up so much goodwill from gamers that we're happy to wait a little longer. Even if we knew nothing about the setting, even if we had never played the tabletop RPG from 1988, even if we had no clue Keanu Reeves was making an appearance, we would still be waiting for this game with bated breath. Because it was made by a little studio that stuck to its ideals to conquer first Poland and then the world. Because it was made by CD Projekt Red. I'm Julian Huguet, and I would like to apologize for my bad Polish and bad puns. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at HugItOut, where I will make more puns and play Cyberpunk 2077 obsessively when it launches November 19th.